Why power changes people. You send a message to your boss at 9 p.m. asking if you can take Friday off. You write it 3 different ways before you send it. You add "if that works for you" at the end. You check your phone twice before bed. You wake up and check again. She replies at 10 a.m. the next day. Just, "That's fine." You feel relief, then you feel something else. You spent 12 hours thinking about something she answered in 2 seconds. She probably didn't think about it at all. Now imagine it the other way. Someone who reports to you sends the same message. You're watching TV. You see it. You think, "Yeah, sure," and you keep watching TV. You answer the next day when you're back at your desk. You don't wonder if they're worried. You don't think about how long they waited. It doesn't occur to you. Same situation. Same request. Completely different experience. And the difference isn't personality. It's not that one person is anxious and the other is calm. The difference is position. One person needs an answer. The other person gives answers. That difference changes everything about how the interaction feels. This is what people mean when they say power changes people. They don't just mean it corrupts. They mean it changes what you pay attention to. It changes what you notice. It changes what you think is normal. And it happens so gradually that you don't realize it's happening. Power is not just authority. It's not just a title. Power is when you control something someone else needs. It can be access. It can be permission. It can be information. It can be money. It can be attention. It can be time. When you control what someone else needs, you don't have to think about them as much as they have to think about you. That's the center of it. They have to track your mood, your timing, your preferences. You don't have to track theirs. This imbalance doesn't require cruelty. It doesn't require intention. It happens automatically. Because when you need something from someone, you pay attention. When someone needs something from you, you have the option not to. Over time, that option becomes a habit. The habit becomes invisible. And the person with power stops noticing how much attention they're receiving and how little they're giving back. It starts with small differences. One person has something the other person needs. A manager controls the schedule. An employee needs the schedule to plan their life. The manager makes the schedule on Thursday for the next week. The employee checks their phone on Thursday afternoon. The manager doesn't think about when they post it. The employee's weekend plans depend on when it goes up. A friend group has one person with a car. That person decides when to leave. Everyone else says, "Whenever you're ready." The person with the car doesn't feel like they're controlling anything. They're just driving. But everyone else is on their timeline. The driver says 5 minutes and takes 15. Nobody says anything because they need the ride. A parent controls access to the Wi-Fi password. A teenager wants to finish their homework. The parent says, "After you clean your room." The teenager cleans the room. The parent is finishing a phone call. The teenager waits by the door. The parent doesn't notice they're waiting. The teenager doesn't interrupt. The parent finishes the call, stands up, stretches, gets a glass of water, then gives the password. The teenager has been standing there for 6 minutes. The parent has no idea. These aren't dramatic moments. Nobody is yelling. Nobody is being cruel. But in each case, one person's time and attention are worth more than the other person's. Not because anyone decided that, because the situation made it true. And once that difference exists, it starts to shape how people behave. The person who needs something starts to manage the interaction. They choose timing carefully. They soften their requests. They say, when you get a chance, even when it's urgent. They say no worries, even when there are worries. They thank people for things that aren't really favors. They're not being fake, they're being careful. Because they need the other person more than the other person needs them. The person who has what someone needs doesn't do any of that. They don't soften, they don't add disclaimers. They don't say, if you have time. They just say what they need. Send me that file. Let me know by Thursday. Can you cover my shift? And here's what happens. The person with less power hears a request and thinks, I should probably do that. The person with more power makes a request and doesn't think about it again. They assume it will happen. And usually it does. Because the other person knows what's at stake. Watch what happens with response time. The employee emails the boss a question at 9 a.m. The boss answers at 4 p.m. The employee thanks him right away. The boss doesn't reply to the thank you. That's normal. Now reverse it. The boss emails the employee a question at 9 a.m. The employee sees it at 9:02. They answer by 9:30. The boss doesn't say thank you. Also normal. The person with less power replies faster. They thank more. They close loops. The person with more power leaves gaps. They don't close loops. They don't have to. And over hundreds of small exchanges, this pattern becomes the texture of the relationship. Power decides who waits and who gets waited for. A CEO is running late to a meeting. 10 people sit in the conference room. They don't start without her. They check their phones. They make small talk. She arrives 12 minutes late. She doesn't apologize. She says, okay, let's get started. Everyone opens their laptops. The meeting begins. If one of those 10 people arrived 12 minutes late, it would be different. They would apologize. They would slip into their seat quietly. Someone might glance at them. The CEO might not pause at all. The same amount of time, the same interruption, completely different meaning. Doctors run late, patients wait. A doctor is 40 minutes behind. The patient sits in the waiting room. Then they sit in the exam room. The doctor comes in and doesn't mention it. The appointment starts. The patient doesn't complain. They needed this appointment. It took 6 weeks to get it. If the patient arrived 40 minutes late, the appointment would be canceled. This isn't about medicine or leadership. It's about leverage. The person who controls the resource controls the clock. And the person who controls the clock stops thinking about what it feels like to wait. The same words mean different things depending on who says them. A boss says, let's connect tomorrow. The employee clears their calendar. They assume the boss will tell them when. The boss forgets. The employee doesn't follow up. They don't want to seem pushy. An employee says, let's connect tomorrow. The boss says, sure, send me a time. The employee sends 3 options within an hour. The boss picks one 2 days later. A professor says, come by my office, hours anytime. Students hear, if you really need to, don't waste my time, come prepared. A student says, I'm available anytime. The professor hears, I need this. Anytime from a position of power means fit into my schedule. Anytime from a position of need means I'll fit into yours. The same phrase, opposite meanings. And everyone involved understands this without it being explained. When someone with power goes silent, people notice. When someone without power goes silent, nobody does. A manager stops responding to an employee's messages. The employee notices immediately. They wonder if they did something wrong. They check their sent messages. They ask a coworker if the manager seems off. They lose sleep. An employee stops responding to a manager's messages. The manager notices eventually, usually when they need something. Then they follow up. Hey, did you see my message? The silence means something different in each case. The manager's silence feels like a signal. The employee's silence feels like a mistake. A client doesn't reply for 3 days. The freelancer assumes the project is in trouble. They send a follow-up. Just checking in. They try to sound breezy. They're not breezy. They're worried. The freelancer doesn't reply for 3 days. The client assumes they're busy. Or they forgot. The client sends a short message. Need this by Friday. No just checking in. No breeziness. Just the deadline. Silence from someone who has what you need feels heavy. Silence from someone who needs what you have feels like nothing. A senior person makes a mistake. People frame it as an anomaly. She's usually so on top of things. He must be stretched thin. The mistake gets absorbed quietly. Someone else fixes it. The senior person might not even know it was fixed. A junior person makes a mistake. It gets noted. Sometimes out loud. Sometimes just internally. He's still learning. We need to keep an eye on her. The mistake becomes part of their reputation. They know it. They apologize multiple times. They're careful for weeks afterward. The same size mistake, different consequences. And the difference comes from leverage. If you're senior, people depend on you staying in a good mood. They depend on you continuing to approve things, sign things, grant things. So they smooth over your mistakes. They don't want you to feel criticized. They need you functional and accessible. If you're junior, you depend on people thinking you're competent. You can't afford to seem careless. So you over-apologize. You fix it fast. You try to prove it won't happen again. The person with power gets room for error. The person without power doesn't. This is the part people don't talk about enough. Power doesn't just change how you act. It changes what you see. When you have power, people come to you. They bring you problems. They bring you questions. They bring you updates. You don't go looking for information. Information comes to you. And because information comes to you, you stop wondering about what you're not hearing. You assume if something was important, someone would tell you. You start to believe that your inbox is a complete picture of what's happening. It's not. It's a picture of what people think you need to know or want to hear. A manager asks, "How's everything going?" in the hallway. The employee says, "Good." The manager believes them. Why wouldn't they? If something was wrong, they'd say so, right? Wrong. The employee has 3 problems. One is urgent, but the hallway isn't the place, and the manager seems busy. And last time someone brought up a problem in passing, the manager seemed annoyed. So the employee says good and keeps walking. The manager never knows there was something else. Over time, the manager starts to think everything is running smoothly because everyone keeps saying it is. They're not lying, they're managing the interaction. And the manager has stopped asking in ways that make real answers possible. When you have power, you stop getting honest feedback. Not because people are scared, because they're careful. A director gives a presentation. It's confusing. People in the room are lost. The director finishes and says, "Any questions?" Silence. Someone asks a clarifying question that's really a gentle note that something wasn't clear. The director answers it quickly and moves on. They think the question was about a detail. It wasn't. It was about the whole structure. But nobody says that. After the meeting, people talk in the hall. I had no idea what she was talking about. That was all over the place. But nobody said that in the room, and nobody will say it to her later. She thinks the presentation went well, because nobody told her it didn't. An intern gives the same presentation. People interrupt. They ask questions. They look confused. The intern can see it on their faces. Someone says, "Wait, I'm lost, can you go back?" The intern knows immediately that it didn't land. Same quality of presentation. Completely different feedback. The person with less power gets real-time information about how they're doing. The person with more power gets polite nods. And here's the trap. The person with power starts to think they're better at things than they are, because no one tells them otherwise. They lose access to the information they need to improve, and they don't even know they've lost it. When people do things for you regularly, you stop seeing the effort. An assistant schedules all your meetings. You show up, the rooms are booked, the links are sent, the agendas are attached. It seems easy, because for you it is easy. You just show up. You don't see the back and forth. You don't see the calendar Tetris. You don't see the follow-ups. You don't see your assistant staying late because you added a meeting at the last minute and everything had to shift. You start to think scheduling is simple, because in your experience, it is. A parent comes home. Dinner is ready. The kitchen is clean. The kids are in pajamas. It feels calm. It feels like it just happened naturally. What they don't see, the other parent rushed home early. They prepped while helping with homework. They negotiated with a toddler about wearing pants. They timed everything to be ready at 6:15. The parent who walked in at 6:15 experiences it as ease. The parent who made it happen experiences it as work. And when something is always handled before you see it, you forget it needs to be handled at all. You start to think it happens on its own. And when it doesn't happen, you're surprised, sometimes annoyed, because you've lost track of the labor. Two people can be in the same situation and live in completely different worlds. A manager and an employee both attend the same meeting. Afterward, you ask them how it went. The manager says, "Fine, we covered what we needed to cover." The employee says, "I wasn't sure if I should speak up. I had a question, but everyone seemed like they wanted to move on." Then at the end, she said my name and asked if I had thoughts, and I kind of froze. I said something, but I'm not sure it made sense. I don't know if it was okay. Same meeting, same room, same hour, completely different experience. The manager wasn't tracking whether people seemed nervous. She wasn't watching faces to see if it was safe to talk. She wasn't replaying her own words afterward. She said what she needed to say and moved on. The employee was doing all of that, and also trying to participate, and also trying to figure out what the manager wanted, and also wondering if they said the wrong thing 3 minutes ago. This is the split. The person with power moves through the interaction focused on the task. The person without power moves through the interaction, managing the relationship and the task at the same time. And because they're paying attention to different things, they remember different things. The manager remembers decisions. The employee remembers moments. Here's where it gets tricky. When someone acts cautious, quiet, or overly polite, we think that's who they are. We forget that's how they're responding to the situation. An employee is soft-spoken in meetings, doesn't push back much, agrees quickly. The manager thinks they're conflict-averse. They're a people pleaser. That's their personality. That same employee goes to dinner with friends. They argue about where to eat. They make fun of someone's music taste. They disagree loudly about a movie. They're not conflict averse there. They're not a people pleaser there. The difference isn't them, it's the stakes. At work, disagreement has consequences. At dinner, it doesn't. So at work, they're careful. At dinner, they're not. But the manager only sees them at work. So the manager thinks careful is who they are. The same thing happens in reverse. A manager is direct, doesn't soften requests, doesn't over-explain. People think they're confident. They're assertive. That's their personality. But put that same manager in a room with their own boss, or a big client, or someone they need something from, and watch what happens. They soften. They add disclaimers. They say, when you get a chance. They do all the things their own employees do. It's not confidence, it's position. The behavior changes when the power changes. But we forget that. We see someone act one way, and we think that's who they are. We don't ask, who are they when the stakes are different? None of this happens in one moment. It builds slowly through repetition. The first time someone doesn't reply to your message for 2 days, you might think they're busy. The 5th time, you stop expecting quick replies. You adjust. You send messages earlier. You don't follow up. You just wait. The first time your question gets skipped in a meeting, you think maybe it wasn't clear. The 3rd time, you stop asking questions out loud. You save them for later, or you don't ask at all. The first time you have to chase someone for a decision, it's just a thing that happened. The 10th time, it's the relationship. You're the one who chases. They're the one who gets chased. And here's what happens to the person on the other side. The first time they don't reply for 2 days, maybe they feel a little bad. The 5th time, they don't notice. It's just how long they take. The first time they skip a question in a meeting, maybe they meant to come back to it. The 3rd time, they've forgotten it happened. The first time someone chases them for a decision, they think, I should be faster about this. The 10th time, they think, why is this person always following up? The behavior that started as circumstance becomes the norm. And once it's the norm, both people stop questioning it. The most important thing power does is this. It makes it harder to imagine what it's like to be on the other side. When you don't need to wait, you forget what waiting feels like. When you don't need to ask permission, you forget what it's like to need permission. When you don't need to worry about tone, you forget that other people do. A manager sends a message at 11 p.m. Just a quick question. They're not expecting an answer tonight. They're just getting it off their plate. The employee sees it at 11:04. They're in bed. They don't know if it's urgent. They don't know if they're supposed to answer now. They feel their heartbeat pick up a little. They open it. They read it. They decide to answer in the morning. They don't sleep as well as they would have. The manager falls asleep fine. They sent the message. It's handled. They'll check tomorrow. The manager doesn't think about what it's like to receive a message from your boss at 11 p.m. because they're not receiving it. They're sending it, and sending feels different than receiving. If you ask the manager, would you want your boss to message you at 11 p.m.? They'd probably say no, but they don't make the connection, because in their experience, sending a message at 11 p.m. is no big deal. It's just a message. This is the empathy gap. You stop remembering what it feels like to be in the position you're not in anymore. And the longer you're in power, the wider the gap gets. The other thing that happens is that people around you start managing your emotions. If you're in charge, people try to keep you in a good mood. Not because they're manipulative, because your mood affects them. If you're frustrated, meetings get tense. If you're short with people, everyone feels it. So people try to keep things smooth. That means they don't bring you bad news unless they have to. They don't bring you complaints unless they're serious. They don't bring you problems unless they've already tried to solve them. And that means your picture of what's happening is always a little better than reality. A principal walks through the school. The hallways are calm. Classes are focused. A teacher smiles and waves. Everything seems fine. What the principal doesn't see, that teacher spent 15 minutes before the principal walked by getting the class to settle down. Another teacher saw the principal coming and closed their door because their lesson was falling apart. A student was sent to the office 5 minutes ago, but the principal hasn't been told yet because the vice principal is handling it. The principal's experience of the school is the managed version. The version where people have already smoothed out the chaos. And if that's what you see every day, you start to believe that's what's there. You think you run a calm school. You don't realize how much work other people are doing to make it seem calm when you're around. When someone has power over you, you stop correcting them, even when they're wrong. A boss misremembers a conversation. They say, "You told me you'd have that done by Wednesday. You didn't. You said Friday. You have the email." But you don't correct them. You say, "I'll get it to you by Wednesday." Why? Because the cost of being right isn't worth it. Maybe they get defensive. Maybe they feel embarrassed. Maybe they just don't like being corrected. It's easier to let it go. So you let it go. And they never find out they were wrong. And that happens again and again. And over time, they become someone who misremembers things and doesn't know it. Not because their memory is bad, because no one corrects them anymore. A senior person tells a story at dinner. They get a detail wrong. Everyone at the table knows it's wrong. No one says anything. The person tells the story again a month later. Same wrong detail. Still no correction. Eventually, the wrong version becomes the version they believe, because it's the only version they've ever heard themselves tell out loud without pushback. This happens with opinions too. A powerful person says something dismissive about a topic. It's not quite right. It's missing context. The people around them know this, but they don't push back. They nod, or they stay quiet. The person takes the nods as agreement. They think their opinion is more solid than it is. Next time the topic comes up, they're even more confident, because last time everyone seemed to agree. They're not learning, they're calcifying, and the people around them are helping it happen by staying quiet. Once this dynamic is in place, it's hard to break, because everyone is responding to everyone else in ways that make sense in the moment, but lock the pattern in place. The person with power doesn't ask for feedback because they don't think they need it. The person without power doesn't give feedback because it feels risky. So no feedback happens. And the person with power takes that as confirmation that everything is fine. The person with power doesn't notice when they're late or slow to respond because no one mentions it. The person without power notices but doesn't say anything because it seems small or petty. So the behavior continues, and the person with power doesn't realize it's a pattern. The person with power stops imagining the other side because they're not living it. The person without power is living it constantly. But they don't describe it because it sounds like complaining. So the gap in understanding just grows. Everyone is acting reasonably given what they know and what's at stake for them. But the system they're creating together makes it so the person with power becomes less and less aware of the experience of the people without it. Here's something that reveals the whole thing. Watch what happens when the power flips. A person gets promoted. Suddenly, they're managing people who used to be their peers. And something strange happens. The people around them start acting differently. They're a little more formal, a little more careful. They don't joke the same way. The promoted person notices, and sometimes they say nothing has to change, we're still the same. But it already has changed, because the relationship isn't the same. Now there's a power difference, and everyone's behavior is adjusting to it. What the promoted person often doesn't notice is that they're acting differently too. They're a little less available. They're a little slower to respond to messages. They're a little quicker to end conversations. Not because they're trying to, because they have more to pay attention to now. More requests, more decisions. They're rationing their attention in ways they didn't have to before. But from the inside, they feel the same. So when people start treating them differently, it feels weird. They think, why are people being so formal? They don't realize their own behavior changed first. The reverse happens too. Someone loses a position, gets laid off, steps down. Suddenly people don't reply as fast. Invitations slow down. The person feels it. People are treating me differently. And they are, because the leverage shifted. What's strange is that the person who lost power usually sees this clearly. They notice how much people's warmth was tied to their position. But when they had the power, they didn't notice they were receiving that warmth. It just felt normal. Most people don't want to believe they've changed because of power, so they explain it other ways. I'm just busier now. That's true, but busy is partly a function of power. When you have power, people give you things to be busy with. You're not just busy. You're busy with things other people need you to decide. I've always been direct. Maybe. But directness lands differently depending on position. When you're junior, being direct is risky. When you're senior, it's efficient. The same behavior, different affordances. People are more sensitive now. Maybe people didn't tell you before when something bothered them. And now they still don't tell you. But you're noticing the gap between what you say and how people react. That gap was always there. You just have more power now, so it's wider. The most common defense is, I haven't changed. I'm the same person I always was. And in some ways, that's true. But the situation around you changed. And situations shape behavior. You're the same person in a different context, and context is doing more than you think. Power doesn't make people evil. It makes them unaware. When you don't need to think about someone, you stop thinking about them. When you don't need to wait, you forget that waiting is hard. When you don't need permission, you forget what it's like to ask. And the trouble is, this all makes sense from the inside. When you have power, your experience is that things run smoothly. People are capable. Requests get handled. You're not trying to ignore anyone. You're just operating in the environment as it presents itself to you. But the environment presents itself differently to you than it does to other people. You're seeing the managed version, the smoothed out version, the version where people have already adjusted to you. And the longer you have power, the more that version seems like the truth. This is why power changes people, not because it reveals who they really are, because it changes what they're able to see. The person with power isn't worse than anyone else. They're just in a position that makes certain things invisible. And humans are very good at not noticing what they don't have to notice. If you want to understand someone's behavior, don't just ask what kind of person they are. Ask what position they're in. Ask what they need and what they don't need. Ask who has to pay attention to them and who they have to pay attention to. The same person in a different position will act differently. Not because they changed inside, because the situation gave them different information and different options. And if you find yourself with power, the question isn't whether you're a good person. The question is, what are you not seeing? Who's managing you that you don't realize? What effort are you not noticing? What feedback are you not getting? Because the gap is already there. You just can't see it from where you're standing. You're in a meeting. Someone asks you a question. You answer it. You move on. You don't think about it again. Later, someone tells you that person spent 20 minutes before the meeting deciding whether to ask that question. They practiced it. They worried it was stupid. They waited for the right moment. They finally asked. You answered in 12 seconds. You had no idea. Why would you? From your side, it was just a question. Easy, simple, done. That's the gap. That's what power does. It makes your experience light and their experience heavy. And you don't know, because heaviness doesn't announce itself. It just sits there, quiet, waiting. Most of life is like this. Small exchanges where the weight is distributed unevenly. And the person carrying less doesn't realize how much the other person is holding. Pay attention to who waits for you, who softens their words, who thanks you for things that aren't really gifts, who tracks your mood, who adjusts. That's where the power is, not in the title, not in the authority, in the pattern of who has to think about whom. And if you're the one being thought about more than you're thinking, that's not because you're important. It's because you're in a position where you don't have to. That position will feel normal. It will feel like nothing, like the way things are. But it's not nothing. It's just invisible from where you stand.